Now you're probably asking yourself, who is this guy? And why am I playing WindWaker almost 20 years after its initial release? What took you so long? Well, that's a good question, and I hope that by the end of the video, you'll not only have an answer to that question, you'll also understand the deep appreciation I have for the game now as well. But before I dive into the game, I want to give you a bit of backstory as to why I didn't play it for so long. The year is 1998. Zelda mania was real. Ocarina of Time ads were everywhere. Magazines, storefronts, TV commercials, you name it, and Zelda was there. I distinctly remember getting excited when the TV ad would air, having to sit so close to the screen and reminding my parents that that's what I wanted for Christmas that year. My mom typically replied with, "We'll see," which I knew meant you're getting it, so that's that. Christmas that year, I got the game, and it absolutely blew me away. Up until this point, I had only played 3 games: San Francisco Rush, Quake 64, and Super Mario 64. Rush was a fun arcade racing experience, but it didn't have much depth. Quake, while having a system of progression in the form of new weapons, didn't require you to use certain items in specific scenarios all the time. Super Mario 64, while mechanically a great game and an all-time classic, also didn't make use of a vast inventory system of items and have the sort of progression system that Zelda had. And so Zelda introduced me to an entirely new set of mechanics with its items and really set my standard for the series. Fast forward a few years and my hype for a true next-gen Zelda really grew and grew. I didn't really have a whole lot of interest in Majora's Mask for whatever reason. This was around the time the Link vs. Ganondorf tech demo aired, and I was absolutely floored by the grim and dark tone of this demo. The next Zelda was going to absolutely blow me away, and then screenshots surfaced and it all fell apart. I was so confused that the game looked the way that it did. What happened to the tone? Why are the graphics so cartoon-like? I felt so betrayed. How could Nintendo do this to me? I wrote it off as childish, and I boycotted the game even after its initial March 2002 release date. Even as my friend group at the time would talk about their progress, which dungeon they were on, what secret island they thought they had found, I still held out. Years passed. The game promised in the demo, Twilight Princess finally released, but I had little interest in it. I'd already moved on to more mature franchises like Resident Evil and Devil May Cry, but as an adult, I'm not really held back by the desire to appear older or be into more mature things just for the sake of maturity amongst peers. And so, in 2022, I ended my boycott of Wind Waker. So what do I think? Well, long story short, I loved it with some minor gripes. The Wii U makes this game very enjoyable. I like how I don't have to pause my game to look at my map or swap items out. All I have to do is tap and hold on the item I want and then drag it onto the corresponding button that appears on the screen. It's intuitive, natural feeling, and it's a strong suit of Wii U games in general that hasn't really been replicated since. I also enjoy the gyro aiming. Being able to point the gamepad exactly where I want the cursor to go was a godsend for the times I had to shoot an arrow at a specific location. When first booting the game up, the first thing that jumped out to me was just how stylized everything is. The cell shading has done wonders aging this game. Time of day, weather, and wind direction will often change the appearance of the world around you, casting deep shadows or brilliant highlights on objects. I spent the majority of my time with Wind Waker on the ocean, sailing around, exploring, discovering new islands to uncover on my map. I rarely do this with games. I'm by no means a completionist, but I still felt like I wanted to uncover more of the map and find out what was there, even if I had no intention of completing the objectives immediately. I prefer when game maps are smaller and packed with more content as opposed to massive maps with less content, and I'm confident in saying this game is the former. There are plenty of different islands that serve one purpose or another, whether it be a puzzle for a piece of heart or a combat challenge for some rupees. You always have at least one thing to do per island on the grid. This doesn't even include the chest full of rupees that you can pull up out of the ocean or the minigames. I found this great minigame that I had no intention of completing until I started playing it. You have to shoot the ships with the cannon under a certain amount of cannonballs. You're not given the usual trajectory and instead have to rely purely on the distance given in the bottom right of the screen. I had to repeat it a few times, but I was hooked. Another minigame I loved was the first I found on Windfall Island, Squid Hunt. It's basically Battleship. There are 3 squids of different sizes and you have to sink all 3 before you run out of cannonballs. I kept replaying it just to hear the guys' reactions to a hit or miss. The game has a semi-open world structure. Sure, there are places on the map where you can't access them to completion without being past a certain event in the story, or without a certain gadget, but hints and clues are frequently given by NPCs, letting you know what you need to do to continue with that objective. You're never truly in the dark as to where to go or what to do next. Outside of the sprawling open ocean are larger islands that contain content to further the story, and typically you'll be faced with a dungeon. Dungeons have always been my favorite part of Zelda. The mix of combat and puzzles always hitting the sweet spot for me. Each dungeon you typically work through a few challenges with your existing items, but then later on you're given a new item, and that opens up new areas of the dungeon that previously were not accessible. This combined with the end boss that requires the use of your new item makes for an enjoyable experience. I was really happy to see Phantom Ganon return. Playing Dead Man's Volley with with him has been a staple of the series for years. Bosses in the game are generally fun to fight and don't require a ton of planning. My favorite boss in the game was probably Godan, the boss of the third dungeon, the Tower of the Gods. The music during this fight hyped me up and pushed me to be more risky with my attacks, which didn't always pay off. Speaking of the music, for a game with such a friendly aesthetic, this genuinely has some of the creepiest music and enemies in the series. I just about browned my pants when the Re-Dead showed itself for the first time with its high-pitched screech and bobbling head. I was happy to see many other enemies from previous games return, such as Stalfos, Armos, Keese, and many more, albeit with different designs. So far, I've only spoke positively about the game. So what did I not like? Well, it's hard to criticize WindWaker without sounding nitpicky, so I'll try to keep this short. One nitpick I had was the performance. The game would occasionally slow down and freeze up during chaotic scenes, typically during boss fights and battles on the ocean. Not an issue that bothered me really, because it was rock solid outside of these instances, but it may bother you. For the keen-eyed among you, you may have noticed this little blinking icon in the corner of the screen. This pops up on your screen whenever your gamepad battery is low. Okay, fine, right? No problem. Nobody wants their gameplay abruptly interrupted, right? Yes and no. The primary problem here is that the gamepad itself has a low battery LED, which makes this flashing icon little more than a nuisance. Why do I need this battery icon flashing on the screen, ruining my immersion? There's no option in the settings to turn this off. It even displays during cutscenes. It's not like you never look down at your gamepad. It's crucial and integrated into the gameplay. I ended up just unplugging my charging dock and plugging the gamepad directly into the wall. Speaking of the WindWaker itself, the biggest glaring issue for me was the constant repetition of playing songs on it. For a while there, I was constantly playing Wind's Requiem, which changes wind direction and helps your ship sail faster. Whenever you needed to change the direction of your ship, you had to play the song. Now, the Swift Sail found in the auction house removed the need for this, but this was also around the time where I was introduced to the Earth and Wind dungeons. These dungeons require a specific companion to enter, and during the majority of the playthrough, they accompany you on your journey through the dungeon to solve puzzles, such as sitting on door switches or planting a seed that sprouts a tree you can hookshot onto. These two companions, Medley and Makar, can be controlled by playing a song. And yes, you have to play the song every single time. There's no quick switching, no shortcuts, nothing. This would not be an issue if you controlled them for a substantial amount of time, but you don't. You'll control them for a minute or two, max. You cannot open doors, fight enemies, or even take damage, or you'll be returned to controlling Link. Medley is controllable in the Earth Temple. Generally speaking, I thought the temple was a bit easier to navigate, and the puzzles were a bit more interesting, so it wasn't a huge issue in this dungeon. However, I found the Wind dungeon to be the weakest in the entire game. It has a centralized location that is entirely vertical, with a large fan under it that blows upward, allowing you to use your Deku Leaf and glide around the room. I frequently missed my target, ran out of magic, which the Deku Leaf requires, or I got Makar into a bad situation. That last bit is entirely my fault. However, by this time, I was annoyed with the constant switching between Link and Makar, and I was trying to get through the level as fast as possible, as I was frustrated with the dungeon. Continuing with this frustration, the boss of the dungeon, Mulgara, was a mess. The room is full of quicksand, and Mulgara is a sort of sandworm-looking creature, and what you have to do is wait for it to raise its head above the sand, and it'll stick its tongue out, and you have to target said tongue, and then grab it with your hook shot, pull it towards you, and stab it a few times. It'll send out Lenmolas, which are these centipede-looking creatures that weren't really a threat by themselves, but I frequently would target them instead of the boss. So this distracted me and gave the sand time to pull me closer into the boss, where he would gobble me up and spit me out. I could have played this better, sure, but by this time I was ready to leave the dungeon and move on. Speaking on the last few hours of the game, I won't show any significant gameplay, but it has to be said that I felt that it blended the open world and the linear gameplay perfectly. All in all, I'm split on how I feel. One part of me regrets not playing this game as a young child, whereas another part of me appreciates the fact that I waited so long. If I played this as a child, I certainly would have a different tone today when speaking about it. I'm sure once I got past the initial shock of the visuals, I would have loved this game and called it a classic. The other part of me sees now that I can appreciate the game for what it is as an adult. I can see now that Nintendo took a chance on a new platform, with a new style, with a new cast of characters, but the same excellent Zelda DNA runs through it. As we approach the 20th anniversary of the original release, I can safely say now that this is a classic. Thank you for watching, I appreciate it. This was my first attempt at an essay-style video, so I would love constructive criticism in my comments. I loved making this video, and I certainly plan to make more, so give me suggestions. I would love to, to do more of these. Maybe Majora's Mask. I don't know. Maybe. Phantom Hourglass. Maybe. I don't know. So, anyways, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Please like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends. Thank you very much, and have a good one.